This is just a quick Photoshop tutorial on how to be able to make a selection around this person, how to potentially be able to turn that selection into some kind of mask as if I was going to knock the background out. I'm going to use the quick selection tool, which is also sometimes found underneath the magic wand tool. It's in the same location. To do this, I have to be able to adjust my brush sizes. I can either do that by manually coming up here and seeing that I have a 25 pixel brush with the hardness set at 100%. Please don't adjust the spacing for right now. Or you can see some other videos online that allow you to hold the Control and Option button down, and if I drag right or left, it'll change the size of the brush. If I Control Option, hold down and move up or down, it'll change the brush from being hard to being soft. So I could go up and just check to see what I've done. Those keyboard shortcuts, I pulled the thing way up to this size and I dropped the hardness down to 32%. So it's a soft fuzzy brush. Suggestion, always use a harder brush than what you think you might need when you're cutting the object out. You can always come back down and adjust it later on. It's very easy to make a selection fuzzy later. It's very difficult to make a fuzzy selection hard, or it's almost impossible to do so. So as I'm looking at this, I'm going to realize that maybe the brush is smaller than what it needs to be. I can also use other keyboard shortcuts. The open bracket symbol makes the brush smaller. The close bracket symbol makes the brush bigger. So I'm going to start with about here. I'm going to push and hold and drag down. It allowed me to get most of him in one grab. I'm going to crank the size of the brush down because if I accidentally clicked out here with the brush partially on the background, it's going to include that in my selection. So I'm just going to hit Command Z to undo that. With the smaller brush, I can attack the toe of his shoe and this one over here. If I want to see how I've done, I have multiple ways to do this, but probably a good thing to use is the old-fashioned quick mask tool. I can hit the Q button to move the object into this, and I know I'm in quick mask because it says it up here. Q turns it on, Q turns it off. The words are gone from up here. If I want to do additional modifications, that's this tool at the bottom of the tool palette. If I double click on it, it'll tell me that I can change the color. Green would be great on this guy, but if I was cutting out something in a forest, I would want to change this color to something other than green. The mask can also be set to either be the selected areas or it could be the masked area. So if I wanted to, I could do it this way and try to not to see everything that I'm trying to cut out. That's personally up to you which one you think is the better way to go. I'll just leave it on the selected areas. I can zoom in now, and in the quick mask mode I have only two options of coloring, or at least let's keep it that way. Black paint with just a normal brush tool. Black paint will allow me to add something to the mask. White paint will allow me to cut into the mask as if it had accidentally grabbed something I didn't want. An easy way to reset these brushes is to hit the D button. By doing that, that's the same thing as clicking on this little icon which returns the foreground background to black and white. So D resets them to black and white. X is a useful shortcut for flipping them back and forth. So with this thing set on here, I want to go ahead and try to include a little bit more tennis shoe here and a little bit more of the tennis shoe here. And maybe a little bit of the laces up there and a little bit more of the shoe in there. I also want to go ahead and maybe include some more hair, so I'm just going to use a normal keyboard shortcut to zoom in and the space bar to slide over. Go move to a small brush. There are many different ways to select hair. We'll look at those in some other follow-up videos, but I could go ahead and try to get some of those spikes, and if I flip the X command to get white paint, which means delete from the mask, I could also come in here and I could try to create some of those kind of space holes in his spiky hair. Let's not worry about that too much for right now. So I'm just going to do that right there. Zoom back out. If there's any other thing that I need to fix, again, black or white will add or delete from the mask. I'm going to go ahead and hit Q to get out of the quick mask, and now I've returned myself to my picture that just has my selection on it. Hopefully it's slightly improved. As long as you have any of the normal selection tools selected, whether it's any of these objects or the quick selection tool, you're going to see this button up here called Refine Edge. This is a great thing to get used to clicking on before you actually try to cut him from the background. So if I hit Refine Edge, it's going to pop up this box. It gives me multiple modes to be able to view my picture. It's really not changing anything. Just what does he look like on a white background, which is maybe ultimately my goal, what he might look like on a black background. By looking at it on the black background, I can see that I still have this kind of slight halo around him. So a couple ways to get rid of that. One, on the output down here, I could click to decontaminate colors. That'll often change that from kind of a yellowish hue to something a little bit more white. Another thing that I can end up doing, you'll just get used to changing these over time, is I could hit the smooth button and move that a little bit to the right. What that does is if you had any kind of slight imperfections where your selection was wiggling back and forth, and that especially pops up if you're using a selection on a very low res image, that'll kind of even some of those out. I could adjust the feather right now, but there's multiple ways to do that later on, so I'm not going to do that. Change the contrast. Another common thing people do is adjusting the shift slightly because it's normally set at 0. If I move it to the right, that's going to add more of the background back in. That's not normally what I want to end up doing. Instead, I might want to adjust this. I'm going to move this too far, but if I move it to the left, hopefully you can see this in the video, it went ahead and trimmed inside my halo to try to get rid of a little bit more of that. I think that sometimes just setting the shift edge is just a slightly negative number can help. The big thing you can do is down here, back again in the output section. I could output this back to a normal selection if I wanted to, but most of the time what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to cut him out and move him to a mask. So letting go on new layer with the layer mask is often an option that you'll end up wanting. If I click OK right now, it has moved my object over here into the layer palette. I can still see the entire image, and it's put a mask on right beside it. So the white areas are what it's going to keep, the black areas are what it's going to get rid of, and down here it turned the eyeball off on my original background. So I still have a clean, unhurt copy of that in case I ever needed to go back to it. If I was to save him right now, he's going to come into some other program exactly looking like what's on the screen. So I definitely want to make sure I have the background button off, and I want to see these gray and white checkers. That means that this part is transparent. So if I popped him into another program, the background's not going to come with him. If I'm looking in my layer palette, I can turn the eyeball off on any layer that I want, but I have to remember that even when I've done this and turned this back on, this blue bar tells me which layer I'm on. So right now I'm on what it's labeled as background copy, not the background. Another way that I could have put him on here is I could go back as if I was just sitting at this original point. I had refined the edge. I'm fairly happy with the mask. I could have just gone up to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste, and it'll automatically put a copy of him on a brand new layer. And if I look at the layer carefully, I can see the little teeny gray and white checks. So it's effectively done the same thing, it just doesn't have the mask on it. A lot of times this is very useful, and especially when you've learned how to use the selection tools better, this might be the fastest option to be able to do. However, for right now, I wouldn't recommend this. For example, if I look down here, if there's something I want to come back in and change later, I can always cut more of the image out. But if I'd accidentally cut into the image, I can't bring any of that back. It's gone. I've already cut it away. The beautiful thing about this version, especially as I'm going, is I still have access to the entire file on that layer. So in a way, I've done this without deconstructing the image necessarily. If I look in the layer palette, I have two options here. I am on the picture by having these little rings around this here. I am on the mask. I'm on the picture. I'm on the mask. If I wanted to do something else, some further trimming to this, I could click on the mask button. And again, I'm painting with black and white. If I paint with white, I'm going to bring part of the image back. If I paint with black, I'm going to change the mask. So if I was to come in here and flip, I'm just going to hit the X command, so the white layer is the foreground color. And if I started painting here with the normal brush tool, it's going to go ahead and bring some of that original picture back into this particular thing, which is not necessarily what I want to do in this case. If I have the black paint here, it'll go ahead and continue to cut into the mask. So I'm going to suggest on this that even though this is how this guy looked, that there's maybe too many wrinkles in his jeans to really look good when the image is standing out like this. It looks a little wobbly, plus he's got this sharp edge where his shoulder blade was sticking up really high. So if I come in here on this one, I can go and get black paint, make a smaller brush size, and there's kind of this weird shadow that it's picked up on the knee. I can go ahead with the black paint and I can go ahead and trim some of that out. If I wanted to get rid of some of these extra wrinkles on his jeans with whatever brush size I want, maybe this size, I can come back in and I can just rub to get rid of them and kind of smooth that line out a little bit. Maybe the same thing right in here. I just want to smooth that edge just a tiny little bit. I could examine any other part of the picture. I also here, again, black paint is going to cut into this mask. I could come in here with the black paint and just slowly do this so that I could be removing that extra shoulder blade that just unnaturally looks like it's pointing out too much. And there I've got this mask, and again, it's nice so that I can continue to work on the image and I never really have to worry about cutting anything away or starting over again because it's set like this. As long as I have these other layers turned off, if I was to save this right now as a Photoshop file, it'll go ahead and allow me to pop it into some other program with a completely transparent background. Just have to remember though when I'm doing this, I have to be either on the picture or I'm on the mask. If you make the mistake of being on the picture, and I was to go get the paint tool and I started to paint, it's going to go ahead and actually, I can see that in my little icon right here, I've actually started to paint some black on the actual picture itself, or I'm painting over him. I need to get rid of that. So if I'm going to do this, I have to make sure I'm either on the mask or I'm back on the picture. And I can go File, Save As, and if I save him as a Photoshop file with the layer button checked, it's going to go ahead and include all that transparency and everything like that.